Hello everyone, this is Shannon from That's So Po, and today I'm doing week 49 of my 2021 reads. This week I read some amazing books that I just absolutely loved, and at the end of this video I have just a small mini update about kind of my holiday plans. Timestamps and content warnings are in the description box below. The first book I finished was Feelings by Manjit Thapp, which I heard about from Mercedes at MercysBookishMusings, who I will link below. And this was such a beautiful sort of graphic memoir exploring a lot of the cycles of anxiety and depression that the author goes through. So this is a heavily illustrated book with beautiful illustrations, just focusing on the way that Thapp feels and how related to the kind of cyclical nature of ups and downs that is, relating that to the cyclical nature of the seasons, the different weather, and relating her feelings to those highs and lows of the weather, and the way that this is kind of using the layout of the images, choosing which images to show to build this almost externalization of those internal feelings was done so well. I was really impressed by how evocative these images were of those emotions and just that ability to put into the design of her pages the way that she was feeling. I thought it was really inventive, really creative, really beautifully illustrated, and just explored anxiety and depression and the kind of ups and downs of that really well. I really loved this, definitely recommend it, and I gave it 5 out of 5 stars. Next, I read I Remember Beirut by Zeina Abirached, which is another graphic memoir. So this is sort of a collection of memories that Abirached had of growing up in Beirut in Lebanon in the 1980s during wartime. But this is very interesting because it isn't really a true memoir. It's not a narrative of her childhood. It's not a narrative of the war. Instead, it's just these little flashes of memory. Sort of what you would experience if you try to recall your young childhood, where you may not have full contextualization of the memories that you have. You just have this moment in time that's captured in your memory. And that's what this is like. These are just really very brief 1 or 2 page vignettes of something that she remembers. So the sound of something, or her dad listening to music, or her brother collecting shrapnel from the street, or these sorts of things. And because it is during wartime, you know, a lot of this is related to stuff like bombings and you know, gunfire and these sorts of things, but it doesn't have the feeling of you know, the heaviness of war. Instead, it has the feeling of just random memories that she has. I thought that it was incredibly fascinating. It was just so immersive in that moment in memory, and her art style is absolutely amazing. I think that the sort of stark black and white lines that she uses and the curves and everything, it's just so beautiful to look at, and the memories felt so immersive. I just thoroughly loved this. Although I will say that, you know, because this isn't really any sort of narrative structure, if you're somebody who likes a lot of plot, that sort of thing, it may not work for you. One of my friends, Jen at Remembered Reads, who I will link below, had a review on Goodreads that said that actually reading this after you read her other book, I think A Game for Swallows, which is the narrative story of her childhood, might make it make more sense. So I definitely want to read that as well. And I happen to own another book by her, Le Piano Oriental, which I don't own in English, which is why I haven't actually read it yet. I own it in French and in German. But I really want to get to that too. I just love her art style, and I really liked her storytelling in this, so I just absolutely adored this. I gave it 5 out of 5 stars. And even if you don't like the kind of more atmospheric reads, you want the more narrative plot-based reads, maybe pick up one of her other books. So I loved this book. Then I read We Are Owed by Ariana Brown. This is a poetry collection. I have read one of Brown's previous works, Sana Sana, and really enjoyed it. And so I picked this up because this is her new collection, and it was so good. So this is poetry that is more about politics and identity and emotions. Ariana Brown is Black and Mexican American and queer, and a lot of this poetry collection is really her exploring, especially her Blackness within Mexican American and also Mexican culture. So in this poetry collection, she recalls a lot of the times that she went to Mexico, like as an exchange student. She has many poems about that experience and about trying to connect to her roots, but also because she's Black, being so separated from a lot of experiences and tons of microaggressions, things like that. She also reflects a lot on Yanga, who was basically a slave in maybe the 1600s who led a revolt against the Spanish and sort of took some people and had their own kind of free village, these sorts of things. And so just reflecting on that, really just trying to process a lot of the issues related to her heritage, a lot of the issues related to the conquest by the Spanish of the Americas, related to the slavery that has led to so many issues for her ancestors, and just the modern day microaggressions and all these sorts of things. So this is a highly political but highly personal poetry collection that has a lot of little inserts of information of the history that is informing these poems as well. So if you want something that is poetry really focused on those sorts of issues, this one is so good, so worth picking up. It moved me so much, which is always what I'm looking for in poetry, and I just loved it. I gave it 5 out of 5 stars. And lastly, I read How to Be a Victorian by Ruth Goodman. This is a book that I've heard so many people talk about. It is very beloved, and there is a reason. This is such a good book. I thought that I would like it, but I loved this book. It was just the kind of nonfiction that I'm interested in. So Ruth Goodman basically walks you through the daily life of a Victorian person, so kind of starting with waking up and breakfast and all these sorts of things, and then going to work and dinner at home and all these sorts of things. And it breaks down in each of these chapters talking about what Victorian life was like in these areas, and it discusses all kinds of things. She goes into a lot of detail, and I loved it. So talking about the way that they would make hair products, or talking about the kinds of layers of clothing, or lots of really fascinating details about some pretty bad stuff that was going on in the Victorian era, just things like food. There was so much food scarcity, poverty was so extreme that really only those who were kind of upper middle and upper class had enough to eat, and everybody who was kind of middle class or below was struggling to have enough to eat, and just the complete malnutrition of the Victorian era. I mean, the true lack of fruits, vegetables, or just even anything that you could consider a balanced diet is insane. But even just complete lack of calories. They had so little food. So really fascinating stuff. Some of the other stuff too, there was lots of stuff that was really just neat, but there was a lot that was very disturbing, just like child labor in mines, or things like the opioid epidemic for babies in Victorian era, because medicine was so unregulated, and there were all of these sort of medicines for babies that were supposed to be calmatives, and they were basically just opioids. They were, drugging their babies to get them to stay calm, which often had to be done by a lot of the very poor families, because the mothers would go and work 14-hour days in order to just have enough money to put any food on the table. And so they needed the babies to just stay at home and stay quiet. And so they would basically, give them these calmatives, not realizing that this was a bad thing. And it was done really heavily. Anyway, so there's just so much fascinating information about this, so much detail about kind of the way that the Victorian era itself changed, because it was a long era from the 1830s to basically 1900. And so talking about, you know, what was happening at the beginning of the Victorian era versus the middle versus the end, really fascinating. Ruth Goodman has amazing research skills, the depth of detail and knowledge about all these different facets of daily Victorian life. So this is not so much about the huger kind of political sphere that was going on in the Victorian era. This is very focused on daily life. And I loved it because I love that kind of stuff. So I really thoroughly enjoyed this. I'm with everybody else who says this is a great book to pick up. I gave it 5 out of 5 stars. And I think Ruth Goodman has another one on the tutors, so I definitely want to pick that up too. So in addition to the books that I read this week, I did want to give you guys just a little bit of a mini update because I am planning to take a break from filming over the holidays this year. I'm just feeling in the mood to kind of take it easy. So I do have another video that's going to be coming up later this week, but then after that, probably about 3 weeks, I'm going to just take on vacation, and maybe early January to mid-January, I'll come back and wrap up whatever I read from now until the end of the year, which might be a lot of things because I have so many books checked out from the library. And then, you know, kind of do my yearly wrap up end of year content. So couple of weeks without content from me, but then I'll be back in early mid-January. If you guys have read any of the books that I have talked about in this video, yay you, because these are such good books. Or if you're interested in them, if you have any thoughts, if you've read anything else that is similar to any of these, definitely let me know. Anything you want to chat about, just leave me a comment down below.